Hi, everyone. Welcome again to a live on All About Trauma. We are here today with a special guest from Al-Anon, an organization, non-profit organization dedicated to helping families and friends, relatives and friends of alcoholics, and also people that suffer from different addictions in general. It's a World Wide Web with lots of meetings happening every day all around the world in different languages as well sometimes. And today we're privileged to have a longtime member of this organization. Again, it's run by just volunteers, so it's all free. We'll hear all about Al-Anon and gain some insights into why such an organization has grown to help friends and family members of alcoholics or people that suffer with addiction. So welcome, Rose. We are on the program finally having you to give us some insights into this beautiful network of people that help each other peer to peer to deal with the difficulties that an addicted person brings to our lives.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you, Nicholas, and
Great.
thank you, Randy, for all the technical stuff so that this message can go out to lots of people. And I'm a little bit shy about talking, and that will go as I begin to speak. For me, it's really important to say this out loud. You know, this going to Al-Anon meetings changed my life, and I want to start there because the rest will be details. But what I really want to say is this changed my life. This changed my life from somebody who was despairing and really couldn't find a way to live. In fact, I would wake up every morning too afraid to live. I didn't want to die. I was afraid of dying, but I certainly didn't feel that I had the force to go on and live, and certainly not a useful life or one that could be helpful to the people around me. And so I want to start just by saying what Al-Anon is. As was mentioned, it is a 12-step program. First of all, there was AA, and then Al-Anon was set up about 13 years later for the families and friends of alcoholics. And prior to that, the children, the wives, the husbands, the friends, they would be invited to the AA meetings to come in and, I suppose, get a better understanding of the person that they were living with. And this is what we read when people come in. I'd like to read it directly from our literature. This is how it explains to people coming into the rooms what we are. So the Al-Anon family groups are a fellowship of relatives and friends of alcoholics who share their experience, strength and hope in order to solve their common problems. We believe that alcoholism is a family illness and that changed attitudes can aid recovery. Now that, for me, even that small part there is super important. We don't give advice. Nobody's going to come in and say, you need to do this and you shouldn't do that. There's no advice giving. What happens is people, they share their experience, they share their strength, and they share their hope. And what I heard when I first went into the rooms, I started to hear bits of my story. I started to hear people saying, you know, I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I felt suicidal. I couldn't look after my children. I couldn't hold down a job. They began saying parts of my story. And then they said, this is what I did. And today, this is what's happening. And basically, when we tell our stories in the rooms, that's usually the format that we use. We talk about how we were when we came into the rooms, what we did to change our lives, and how our lives are today. So that's how it usually divides up into those three parts, roughly. And I'm very glad that when I went into the rooms, I didn't know that there was an element of spirituality. I'm really pleased I didn't know that, because I think I had no open mind at that point, and I think I would have dashed out the door. So in fact, I want to start there, because I think when people know that, it could be off-putting. So I think it's really important. I'm going to read this too. Al-Anon is not allied with any sect, denomination, political entity, organization, or institution, does not engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. There are no dues or fees. Al-Anon is self-supporting through its own voluntary contributions. Now, that was important to me. That was important to me because when I went into the rooms, I'd seen lots of therapists. I'd been to group therapy. I'd spoken to medical doctors. And I honestly hadn't found any real help. Nothing actually changed in my life. I spent a lot of money, a lot of time, and felt huge amounts of frustration. So just to say where I was, by the time I came in, I was, desperate is probably the best kind of description. I felt that my whole personality had become unraveled. And I was desperately trying to keep together a facade. I didn't want anyone to know just how awful I was feeling. It felt like a woolen jumper that somebody had caught hold of a piece of the wool and had tugged, and I'd just become totally unraveled. There was, I'd lost all possibility of my resources. I no longer felt like an adult. I felt like a child, and I was constantly trying to hide that from the people around me. And
Wow.
I'd also started by that time, I was having really severe panic attacks. That at that time they were affecting my breathing. So I thought that I couldn't breathe. That's how it felt. I would just feel like somebody had come up behind me and had put a socket, had put a plug into a socket. It just felt like my whole body would be on fire. I would have severe nausea, hard to stand up, dizziness, just really feeling wretched. And I could talk about all the physical I could give you a physical description of the panic attacks. But what's really hard to describe is the actual degree of terror that's involved. And they would leave me shaking and feeling awful for hours afterwards. So, as I say, by the time I came in, I was having maybe 3 panic attacks in any 24 hours. A lot of them were in the night. So I would go to sleep and then I'd just sleep for maybe an hour and a half, and then bang, I would be awake with this sweating and terror. So somebody, and I'm very grateful to this person, somebody picked up on this. A friend of mine picked up on this. I hadn't known them very long, and I didn't know that they were in any 12-step fellowship. And I think she sensed my desperation. And I think perhaps because she'd been there herself, she could see behind the facade. She could see that I was really just trying to hold it together. And she said to me, "Why don't you come along to Al-Anon?" And I kind of said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, "Well, it's for families and friends of alcoholics." And I said, I don't know any alcoholics. I don't have any alcoholics. Why would I go there?" And I was completely confused. And she said to me, "Oh, sure, you must know some alcoholic." Now, at this time, I am totally a child that grew up in alcoholism. I had somebody who was drinking from a very young age in my life, and much older than me, and affecting every part of my life, every part of me growing up. And it took me 3 years in the rooms before I was able to really bring that into consciousness. I don't know if that makes sense. But I did know that I was friends with somebody and loved very dearly somebody who was probably an alcoholic, because that's the other thing, I'm asked not to do in the 12-step programs. I'm not there to say that somebody else is an alcoholic, but they certainly used to drink every day, and they had some very, very disorderly, chaotic behavior. So it's interesting, and people they use the word a lot, denial. I really didn't have any idea that growing up in alcoholism would make a difference to me as an adult. And as I stayed in the rooms, I realized that it really did, it had a profound effect. So all the time I was living in chaos, I wasn't really learning any resources and tools for living. What I was doing was I had a survival kit. I had a survival kit, how to get through the day with somebody, an adult, who was off the wall a lot of the time, who, when drinking, had no inhibitions, was violent, physically, verbally, more than anything, unpredictable. And I think as a child, that's what's really, really tricky. I also had a mother who had been brought up by a severely alcoholic father, and she was a rageaholic. I know that was her way of coping. And we say it's a family illness. It goes through the generations. And if somebody has grown up with chaos, they just, it's very difficult to learn healthy skills for living with somebody who doesn't know themselves.
So at this point, Rose, a kind of an intergenerational effect where your grandparent is an alcoholic and then your mother is rageaholic, you say. What do you mean by that? Also the element of unpredictability and sort of attacks of rage.
Yeah, and it's interesting because she would talk about her father and she would say, oh, you never know what you were going to get. He would come home and he would either beat you or he would come home and he would smother you and be overly friendly. And it was interesting that she understood that there was unpredictability from her own father, but didn't see that in herself because she could be, I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you. It would be, you would never know. You just would never know. And although she was very, very loving, and I'm sure there was a lot of love there was also an incredible amount of irritation. And that could just go off like a bomb, and you wouldn't necessarily know why. But of course, as a child, I grew up thinking it was, it must be something I've done. And that sets up a terrible, it sets up, with a child, I believe, just tries to get it right. So that's like, I'll hop on the left foot, I'll hop on the right foot, I'll clean my bedroom, I'll try and do this, I'll be as quiet as I possibly can, I'll be as good as I possibly can. I grew up.
I will do well at school. I will not do well at school.
Yeah.
You have to try everything in the spectrum to find some kind of rule in how this happens, to sort of understand the mechanism by which these attacks of rage would happen. That's what the mind of the child is doing when you're that little, I guess.
Yeah, because, well, and we're told until the age of 8, the child is living in that kind of world where they're just trying to understand how not to be abandoned. It's like, I've got to fit in. I have to fit into this society.
Yes.
If I'm thrown out of this society, then I will die. It's kind of binary. It's like, that's it. You're either in or you're out. And it's important to stay in, loved and therefore safe.
Yes. And I would, excuse me if I interrupt you there, Rose. I remember studying some research when I was doing my psychology degree. And we were studying these papers that were about understanding the worldview of children about the earth and the sun. And all these worldviews that the children would come up were always very close to the heliocentric view of the solar system that people much earlier on had. Typically in Christianity, in the Catholic religion, we had this sense that the sun, the earth was at the center of the galaxy and everything was spinning around. And children would come up with exactly that view. And the papers were arguing, and the reason why they were coming up with that view is that children have this very tight causal relationship rule to the world around them. They cannot detach their own egocentric position to the events around them. So they're always the primary cause of what is happening around them. And it's a very cause effect, very tight cause effect, like gravity. If I drop something now, that thing will always fall down. And that's a very strong cause effect sort of relationship. And that's how the child seems to think. And I think what you're saying here kind of confirms that.
Yeah, I think children, you only have to listen to children for a short time and they'll come back with, you'll get the impression that they feel whatever has happened is their fault in some way. And it's also, it's interesting because that means that if they do something, they can change it. And that's really the beginning for me of that whole idea of people pleasing. And I think if you don't live in a chaotic family, then that's going to change into life skills. But if you don't get to learn those skills, then what you get stuck with is I'll please people, and then I'll be accepted, I won't be rejected. And that can go on through and into adulthood. And that means that you're not behaving in an authentic way. You're absolutely, you're hanging on to people by manipulating them. And it's not, I'm not using the word manipulate in
a conscious way.
Yeah, or a negative way, just that that it's that childhood idea of, if this person leaves me, then I'm going to die. Because it's still the childhood sort of notion of, if I'm out of the group, then I'll die. And I believe very strongly that is why rejection feels like you're going to die. Even if it's something quite small, or we attach so much importance to being we can't not attach importance to it. We can sort it out as adults, but as children, no, it has to be that way. We have to be attached and safe with an adult. And in fact, when I went into the rooms, that was the very first thing that I noticed. When I went into the rooms, I felt safe. Now,
the Al-Anon meeting.
More thing to say. That's such an easy and small thing to say. But I realized at that point that I had never once in my life felt safe. And I was 45 or something when I went into the rooms for the first time.
Wow.
And the first thing I did was I used to sleep. The very first thing I did in the rooms was I used to snooze, because I had terrible insomnia. I was having the panic attacks, and I felt safe. So I would nod off, and I would nod off, and then I would wake up, I would listen, and I would think, that sounds like that makes sense to me. And but the thing is that, and this is what I think it was very different from being in therapy, is for me to get any kind of reasoning with my intellect, first I had to feel safe. Otherwise, I was operating from a place of terror. I was operating out of that more reptilian brain. I was operating out of a survival kit. And it's very hard to learn new things when you're in a space of fear,
Yeah.
And we know that from children all the way up. But I think if you don't feel safe, then you're protecting yourself, you're defensive, you don't have an open mind. And it's very difficult to hear things. And what's important, and one of the first messages I heard was that it wasn't important for me to understand why I felt so awful. Now, that was good news. Whereas, in therapy, I could talk about my grandparents, I could talk about, the chaos in the home. But what I was doing was looking at details. Whereas there was a shift in the rooms, there they said, you don't have to worry about that. Not for today. And one of those slogans is one day at a time. It is very, very important. For me, I learned to stay one moment, one day at a time, because that I could cope with. And that meant not looking too much into the past and not projecting into the future, because as soon as I went into the future, I would start finding catastrophes, and my imagination was revved up. It was still in fear. So it wasn't finding useful solutions. It was just sort of, I was running around, just pretty crazy, in fact. And that's step one. Step one is, we're powerless over the alcoholic, powerless over just about everything, but we're powerless over the alcoholic, and our lives have become unmanageable. So that's the first thing to look at, like the very first step. How was my life unmanageable? Well, my life was unmanageable. As I said, that time, I was having panic attacks. I was frightened to go out. I did used to manage to go out, but I was suffering from agoraphobia. I also had, and it took me 3 years in the rooms before I had an eating disorder. And that was because me putting food into or not putting food into my mouth was something I could control. And it helped me to control the terror that I felt. Not very well, but it helped me. And when I spoke to a therapist about it, they said, it's not really a eating disorder. It's not really anorexia because you don't have the dysmorphia. I knew that I had to put on weight and I didn't like being thin. So, but excuse me. But that said, it was all part of not being able to take care of myself. Now, I could take care of anybody else. I'd had some medical training. I'd been a carer. I'd been in the caring occupation. I knew how to look after other people, but I really had no idea how to look after myself. And also, when I came in, I really didn't know myself anymore. I'd gotten so far away from my own personality that I barely recognized me. I'd seen myself as somebody who was very capable, but by the time I got into the rooms, I just it was like my whole personality become unraveled. So that's a little bit about how I was when I first came into the rooms. When I got in there, I realized that people were practicing the 12 steps. I also noticed that people were talking about God. And as I said, that was something that bothered me. I mean, it bothered me. And so every time I was there, I would hear this read. When you hear the word God, do not think that we are a religious group. It's merely a convenient word for the HP we talk about. And that concept can be anything you choose, including the power of the group. We have amongst us atheists who do not find the program impossible to practice. Now, I did want to mention that because I do think it puts people off. And I have a...
This is something that is read in the meetings, is it?
It's read in the meetings, yes, because it's quite a revolutionary idea, actually, that you need a higher power. Some people call that higher power God, but you need a higher power because you need to know it's not you. And, my thinking, my way of living my life had got me to desperation. I needed something else. And so it's really the first...
You had tried everything in a way. Like you had gone to as far as you could go.
Yes. Yeah, no, I wasn't getting anything from the people around me that I could use. I'm talking about professionals, doctors. There wasn't anything that I could use to make my life feel better. And I had so much anxiety that obviously turned to depression, because I think after many years of anxiety, it does turn to depression, because I felt a very strong sense of failure. On the outside, my life looked good. I had a partner that I loved. I had children that I loved. I lived in a city that I loved. I'm very curious about life. I'm very fond of nature. You know, there are so many, and I have lots of passions. So there was so much in my life, but I couldn't shift the terror. I couldn't shift the panic attacks.
Wow. And Rose, tell me, at that time, were the specialists that you were meeting talking about trauma as we talk more and more about it today, acknowledging that certain experiences of childhood could have a very high impact on your state in the present?
Some were, some were there. I think it's much easier today, and that's wonderful, because panic attacks, people talk about panic attacks now. 30, maybe 40 years ago, people weren't. It was just depression, and of course, it was that old idea of depression comes from an imbalance in chemicals. So the people I was seeing, and because I was very afraid of anything medical. And this is, you know, this is not a comment on anybody else taking antidepressants, but I was terrified of taking any kind of medicine, so I didn't take anything. So that was tricky, because for the people I was seeing, you know, I was being stubborn, basically. I was being stubborn. I didn't want antidepressants. So that was me refusing help. So that put me in a very lonely place. And from that time onwards, I only saw therapists, because any of the doctors would just offer me antidepressants. So for me, that wasn't a way to go. And the therapists, yes, they did talk about childhood trauma. So I talked about, you know, the violence in my home. I talked about the unpredictability. I spoke about relationships with all my siblings, with boyfriends, then husband. And in fact, what I'm saying is those details were not helpful. Later on, they were helpful. Later on, and I think once I felt safe, then that information was quite useful. And in fact, in the 12 steps, we're encouraged to write all this down, and writing is an incredible tool. And now I'm going to move on to the things that I did that were helpful. So we're encouraged, we actually work this program. We go through it in a way, and we write down answers to questions. And so first of all, we look at our powerlessness and unmanageability. Well, already that's not something easy to do. You know, not everybody wants to say, you know, I'm beaten. What have you got for me? I'm done. You know, I've ruined my life. I'm a total failure. That's how I felt. What are you doing? And so I was ready to listen to I was ready to listen to people, because what was happening was I heard other people share their stories, and then they would say, this is what I did, and today I feel better. So I knew that there were people in there as adults who had been children in alcoholic homes, and they'd grown up, they'd gone into program, they'd done certain things, and they were now having good lives. They were smiling. They were happy. They came into the rooms and they were talking about some pretty, sometimes awful things. Some of the people were still living with alcoholism, where there was, you know, still fighting in the homes. There was still people, you know, threatening them, stealing from them, being abusive in all sorts of ways, being unfaithful, not being reliable with the children at home. All those things were happening, but I saw that they had gathered almost a platform where they could stand and they could live their own lives. And not sometimes people had to leave partners. That was so, but it was up to them to decide. It wasn't anything that was advised. They could make up their own mind. They could work it out for themselves, because at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about people we love. We're not talking about people that we don't know. This is all happening within the family, the violence within the family. You know, these are people that are not being chaotic and not being unloving and not being unkind all the time. No, there are periods of time where things work well. And of course, when that happens, If you're a people pleaser, you're trying to work out, now, what did I do to create that situation so the person felt okay and then they behaved nicely? So there's this terrible kind of vigilance around the alcoholic, around the person who's chaotic. There's this terrible vigilance. It's like, I'm going to observe this person, see what it is that makes them okay, and then I'm going to keep doing it because, like the child, it must be something I'm doing that affects this person. And what I came to realize as a doing the steps is that any time my happiness relies on somebody else, then I'm in trouble. I'm totally in trouble. If I'm going about my life, living my life, waiting for the other person to be okay, then I'm going to be waiting a long time. And that's also something I saw in the steps, that there was all this time wasted. Because, of course, I got to a place where I was feeling pretty resentful. I felt pretty resentful about people that I was trying my very best that they'd be happy, doing as many things as I could for them, doing what I thought they liked. But I expected that in return. I wanted that in return, which I realized was, one, it was not fair, and two, it's unreasonable. And we say it's like going to the hardware shop for oranges. So you go into this person, and of course, if this person happens to be your husband, then yeah, you expect love, friendship, tolerance. You expect those things, and hopefully they're there. But sometimes that can't be the case. That isn't the case, and it then does. I learned that it then doesn't mean you can't have those things in your life. So we talk about changed attitudes, aid recovery. So the first thing that I was shown was, you need to detach from the person. You detach with love from the person. Because as I said, these aren't strangers. These are people, these were people that I loved dearly. And I think for me, one saving grace was, as a child growing up, I had some kind of idea that the person who was behaving in this way, they were bigger than what was happening. Now, it's a bit difficult to explain, but I understood that they were unwell in some way, although unwell probably wouldn't have been the word that I would have used. But it's almost like, we're not our illness. We're not the sickness. We're not the behavior. So I think there was part of me that always was able to love the people in my life and keep that intact. In fact, it was one of the questions you asked me, Nicholas, about how do how can you continue to live? How can you keep the relationship going? And I think for me, as a child, there was definitely a kind of understanding that this person was not behaving in a way that was their whole personality. It was only a small part of them. And yeah, it's
and so there is a line of hope that stays on the sidelines when you can.
Yeah, and it's and it was it was hope that I heard in the rooms. And really, I think when I went to therapists, that's what I wanted to be given. I wanted to be given hope, because for me, the depth of depression was the belief that nothing could change. I could not change, and nothing could change. That for me was the deep despair of depression.
Helplessness.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everything I tried on my own didn't work. Nothing made me feel any better. So,
I must admit that as a therapist, I can see inside of me being so curious about hearing how you think therapists like me failed you in that way. Or would you say that there's absolutely no way that a person like me could have given you what Al-Anon gave you? And if so, why?
Okay. Well, that's pretty simple. No, I don't think any of the therapists failed me, not one of them. They all did their jobs really well. And you know, what came across with it, these people were kind. Oh, these people were kind. And what I think is different in Al-Anon, as I said, is what you get is somebody mirroring back to you. This is how I was. This is what I did. So no, I don't think those people failed me. I think that therapy and Al-Anon can work in tandem, but the person has to feel safe. If the person doesn't feel safe, for me, I should talk only for me. When I didn't feel safe, it didn't get me any further because it didn't give me the tools that I needed to try out. And I was thinking about, you know, what are some of the tools that were useful to me? So one of them was I heard, you know, I had no idea about boundaries, and I heard people saying about you have to put down boundaries, which means you have to speak up. Now, that's all the sort of thing that you could hear in therapy. Totally. But I heard something in the rooms that made me think this person said, that's unacceptable behavior. And I thought, that's interesting. That's interesting to say that to somebody. Now, I had somebody that I was with, and that, as I say, somebody that I loved very much, and the violence that they would show is they would shake me. They would hold my throat and they would shake me. Now, they didn't hit me, but they would shake me. And I can remember I'd heard this in the rooms, and I said out loud, that is unacceptable behavior. I could hardly believe that I was saying this. And the person stopped what they were doing and they said, what? And I said, that is unacceptable behavior. And the person walked away. And now that was an extremely useful tool. I didn't ever have to use that tool again. It was very, very interesting. That was a boundary. Now, I don't know what I'd been doing that I'd perhaps, you know, screamed, shouted, thrashed out myself, said, stop doing that. But that worked, and that was interesting. And also these were phrases that I heard. You like the monkey sees, monkey do. That's what I just copied what that person said. And I had a sibling that was incredibly argumentative, very difficult, very difficult to be around. And somebody said to me, okay, if you get into an argument, don't get into the boxing ring. Just say to them, you might be right. And I thought, I can do that. So the next time I was speaking to them, and there was this tremendous kind of anger coming across the telephone, and I said, well, you know, you might be right. And they said, what did you say? And I said, no, you might be right. And it was like the person just stopped, and it was like I could see there really wasn't anything else to say to that. You might be right. How simple is that? And I wrote it on the back of my hand because I also had gotten to a place where I would get into arguments. I would also create drama and scenes because I was just so overwhelmed. So I would shout at people. Well, that's not okay. But I would shout at people. But I learned that there's a time before I start shouting when I can say to the other person, you might be right. And so that was super important to me. And I also learned in terms of people pleasing. Often I would say yes to people because I was too afraid to say no. I didn't know how to say no. So I would say yes and get myself into all sorts of scrapes because I just didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to put up that boundary. And so somebody taught me to say, that's interesting. Can I think about that? And that works really well because it gives me a time to step out of my own panic and think about, do I want to do this? Is this okay for me? Is this going to be too much for me? It gives me a time of pause. And in fact, many of the tools in Al-Anon are about pausing before you react. So giving yourself some space, just to stand still and be quiet before you make a decision. And that for me has become something of a golden pause. And a lot of people say, to pray. Now, I know, this comes back to our religious stuff and the spiritual stuff and all the stuff that I didn't want to do when I first came in. But I can stand to be quiet. I can stand still and I can be quiet and I can think, what's the next best thing? What would somebody in the room say? And I said to you about, for me, it's been very, very important to find a higher power in my life, because I needed to know that it wasn't me. I needed to know that I wasn't running the show, that there's a whole big universe out there. And I think my kind of spirituality is along those lines. I love everything in nature. I am happy watching clouds. I love trees, flowers, all the details. And for me, it's there's good orderly direction in nature. Autumn, winter, spring, summer, things turn, and I can take one small step after another, and I can stop, and I can just I can look up at the sky. So I can collect my inner self. And some people have as their higher power, they'll say it's my higher good. It's the part of me that isn't affected by the things around me. And I think, that for me is what's been really important. That it's not the outsides. It's not what's happening in my life on the outside that will make me seriously unhappy. It's the voice that's going on inside that says, you're no good, you're a failure, the self-criticism. That's what will make my life hell, even if it doesn't matter where I am. And in fact, I realize this. I've been lucky enough to have been very, very poor and much, much better off. So for me, wealthy, I don't know if anyone else would call it wealthy, but certainly where I didn't have to worry about money. They're two extremes. And I can remember that one of the most miserable times I had was probably I was sitting in a beautiful villa in a gorgeous countryside with a private swimming pool, and everything that as a child you could dream of. And I was so thoroughly miserable. And it took me getting into the rooms to understand that it's not those outside things that make a difference. It really is how kind I'm being to the person inside that really makes all the difference. So I learned, for example, as well, not to, we say, don't compare and despair. I learned to understand that because somebody looked well on the outside, it didn't mean anything at all, that the person could be screaming on the inside. So, yeah, I mean, all those things are, there was a lot that I learned. I'm going to perhaps ask you if you want to ask me any questions at the moment, because...
Rose, actually, what you're sharing is very insightful, because one statement and the slogan that really hit me is that changed attitudes aid recovery. You mentioned that. Would you say that the golden pause is the moment whereby someone reflects their attitude, how you used to reflect your attitude towards conflict, toward boundaries, and change it in that moment? Because, for example, when you are interacting with this argumentative person, did you take that pause to reflect, this is not how I see interactions and conflict anymore. I'm learning to release. Would you say that pause is actually completely related to changing your attitude, taking that time to be in the moment, like you said, one moment at a time, one day at a time, to reflect and change how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's because the thing is that I grew up with it. I grew up with being able to react to conflict and unpredictability, which means, you know, I've got that kind of wildcat stuff going on. You know, I'll maybe scratch out before I sit and think about it. So as I said, you know, initially I just copied what people said. And then a little bit later, I managed to I managed to be able to do this automatically. And in fact, what it is in many ways is it's pulling focus. And I think that is what happens in therapy. And that you see,
wow.
this is what I believe. We talk about reframing, but it's like when you're in it and in the thick of it, just like being in a fight, you're just surviving. You're not calculating. And it takes some pulling of focus. It means me stepping away, stepping back, being able to breathe, which is important to, you know, to be able to regulate the breathing. It means that I'm not going to be operating from a place of adrenaline and fear.
Yes.
You know,
in a way, we could say that it's bringing back online the cognitive aspect of our brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I'm not my intellect. You know, if somebody throws a stone at you, you know, it's the survival part of the brain that's working. You're just getting out of the way. And for many years, that's how I lived my life. And it's you know, it's not the best way to construct and be useful. And that's another aspect of the Al-Anon program. You know, we learn to be of service to the person coming in, so that when the newcomer comes into the rooms, it's important to be there and welcome them, and hopefully pass on a message. Today, really, I hope that it's that's what, you know, what I'm getting across is this changed my life for the better. It gave me life skills that I did not have. It gave me enough quiet in my heart so that I could make sense of speaking to a therapist if I needed to go. And I have, since I've been in the rooms, I've gone back and we've talked about particular things, and it's completely different today. And if I was lucky enough to go back to a therapist that I'd known more than 20 years ago, and it was very interesting to watch her because, of course, she was very, very interested in the program. She wanted to know how I'd managed to, she said, but you're a changed person. You're completely different. Well, you know, I was pretty much batshit crazy when I went to see her. You know, I was just so scared that nothing around me made sense. I had to get some kind of platform under me. I had to be standing on something before I could access.
But I guess you didn't have any friends either, and therapists cannot solve that for you, right? Like what Al-Anon brought into your life was a community.
Yeah, absolutely. Because with all the best will in the world, you see a therapist maybe for an hour or an hour a week, maybe two. But, you know, especially now, I mean, it's amazing with Zoom, because now if I wanted to, I could go on to meetings 24/7. Now, when I first came into the rooms, it was only in-person meetings, face-to-face.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. Good that you reminded us that, because
it's very different now.
Zoom related.
Yeah.
So you were actually meeting people physically once a week or something.
Absolutely, which again is very different. I mean, it is very different. It's wonderful to be actually in a room with somebody. There's something quite magical about being next to somebody, because I think, you know, the compassion that I think in many ways when I first went in, I had absolutely no compassion for me. But when I listened to other people's stories that were similar to mine, I felt compassion. I felt compassion for that person. And that was it was mirrored back to me. Oh, that poor thing, they went through all that stuff. And then maybe a couple of days later, I think to myself, wait a minute, that happened to you too. And you've never had a kind word to say to yourself about that. You never cut yourself any slack, because of course I was a crazy perfectionist. And the good thing about perfectionism is it's perfectionism, procrastination, paralysis. It meant that I'd be spending hours and hours of time trying to get something right, because that was the message I could send out then, that I was right, that I was perfect, that I was okay. And it's
when you live in such an unpredictable environment, one of the answers that most children come upon is that if only I were perfect,
yes.
then the environment would be somewhat regulated, because it's all about themselves again.
Yeah. And I think that, as I said, that's part of the service as well. And that's part for me was getting out of the depression as well, was being able to see a bigger picture. And so helping somebody else was incredibly useful. And so I could, once I'd started working the steps, I then worked with other people, helping them go through the literature, answer the questions, being supportive for them. And as I said, when I first came in, it was by telephone. We would meet up. So we would meet up in groups. And then sometimes we would meet up in the week, just a few people, just to sort of be supportive. And we would telephone one another. And I also, at that moment, I also used to write to people. But the literature is very, very important as well, reading the literature, because there you have
because that's not the thing. I mean, you every time you want to see a therapist, you need to pay a hefty fee oftentimes. But here in Al-Anon, if I understand well, in fact, I've participated in some of these meetings, and from very early on, I was given a document with 20, 30 telephone numbers that I could call.
Yes.
To talk about potential issues that I was having with an alcoholic, or somebody who, as you say, could be as addicted to rage as someone could be addicted to alcohol or other drugs.
Absolutely. And I think, it's important. What changed, in fact, was there's not the us and them. There's no good and bad people in this story. It's a family illness, and hurt people. So it's, the resentment that some people feel, the resentment that I felt about certain things, that had to be taken, that had to be looked at, that had to be examined. And I think, we talk about being obsessed with the other person, trying to change them, manipulate them, trying to stop drinking, behave the way that we want them to, take the kids out, go to the dentist, whatever it is. It's like we become obsessed with the other person. And it's a very tricky affair, obsession. It's like, how do you rid yourself of obsession? Now, going to a therapist, it meant that I was talking about the things that over which I was obsessed, which sort of made things, it didn't help. It didn't help to go into detail about the stuff that I was crazy about. It was more useful to me to stop listening to that voice, which is very hard to turn around. Hear other people say, hey, it is difficult. It's a little bit like, if I said to you, please don't think of 3 pink monkeys. It's like, there they are. The 3 pink monkeys are there. They're in your mind. And it's the same with obsession. Obsession is something that's not welcome. It's there. So learning to move away from obsession was quite something. Because when it's in your mind, of course, it's a carousel. It goes round and round and round. And one of the things we do in Al-Anon is we write. And the interesting thing about writing, however much you write, so if you write your whole story, for example, in step 1, I wrote down the whole story. Brothers, sisters, mother, father, aunties, uncles, everybody. I wrote everything down. But that took me a long time. You can write a long story, or you can just write it in note form. But once I'd written it down on paper, it had a beginning, it had a middle, and it had an end. And I think it's a very different affair when it's not going around in your mind. I think we talk about the, you know, that carousel. When we feel resentment, we get on a carousel, you know, well, they shouldn't have done that. That was unfair. That was unreasonable that they did that. So you become very, very resentful. You know, all the money's been spent for this week's shopping. I don't know, whatever, you know, anything that you feel resentful about. And we say in the rooms that resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. It's like you have to get rid of that resentment. And this, of course, is where forgiveness comes in. Learning to understand what forgiveness is. And that's no small thing. And in most religions, people will say, you know, that's the hardest thing is to actually forgive. And what I learned, and it took me many years, but what I learned was that forgiving has nothing to do with the other person. It's a lot about acceptance. It's like being aware of the reality. This is what happened. It's not saying you're okay with it. It's not necessarily saying that you want to be friends with the person anymore or have any kind of relationship with them. You might not. It has nothing to do with that. What it is for me was letting go of the hurt, putting down the hurt so that I could move on from that point with my life and do something else. And that's you know, that's for me, that was huge.
And part of that ability to move on is due to accepting that there's something bigger than you, and so that it's not just you are moving on, but something is allowing you to move on because that something is able to take on this part of the load that you are carrying, right?
But you're talking now about a higher power, aren't you?
Yeah. So I'm trying to sort of sort out the elements that allow you to unburden yourself. Part of it is the element of the higher power that we talked about before, and part of it is the peers that are with you.
Well, it can be. So the idea is that it needs to be a higher power. Now it can be spiritual concept, and it can be the group. Because what we do is we write down these resentments and we share them with another person. And the idea is that we share them with a higher power. We share them with another person, so our sponsor. And we're sharing them with ourselves because, you know, we have to come out of denial about this stuff. So actually writing it down and hearing ourselves say this stuff aloud is really quite therapeutic. But yeah, you can't do it on your own. It has to be given to somebody. I do have a sponsee that is a complete atheist. So I know that you can work the program and have, they're very, very much into the cosmology though. So
Yeah.
it just has to be a power that's greater than oneself. I heard somebody in program say one day that their dog was their higher power. And I thought, this was early on, and I thought, these people are crazy. What do you mean your dog is your higher power? And they said, well, one, you know, God is dog spelt the other way around. And I thought, that's fair enough. And then they said, my dog teaches me totally unconditional love and joy of life. And it was like, that's very interesting because, yeah, that's true. You know, if I loving people unconditionally, that's pretty amazing. But you can really
usually associated to the figure of Jesus Christ or to the figure of God.
Yeah.
It doesn't, the thing is, it doesn't matter. I mean, I've been in the rooms for more than 25 years. Nobody has ever sort of stepped out at me and said, you know, you've got to come down to this church. What you're asked to do is go find yourself a higher power that works for you, which is, as I said, you can choose your own higher power. That's pretty revolutionary. I'm pretty sure that I went to a church school. I'm pretty sure that if I'd said to the vicar, hey, by the way, I've decided that, you know, your God's not working, so I'm just going to choose my own higher power. I don't think that would have gone over too well. You know, it's quite a revolutionary idea, and it's kind of amazing. And as I said, you know, for me, it's nature. that's when I feel that I'm in communion with something greater than myself. It's
can I join you in that love? Also, Renee, if you allow me today. So I had quite a heavy week last week of counseling, and I came out of it with some stress that I could not digest even through the weekend. So I actually started this week feeling a little bit under, sort of a little bit overwhelmed and under-resourced. And today was a beautiful day, sunshine. I went out and had a little walk towards the woods, and I stepped into the woods, and the leaves of the autumn were falling, and there was a little creek running. And so the falling of the leaves hitting on other leaves and branches of the trees around, it was tick, 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 like this. And then the little creek was sort of flowing and so on. And suddenly I had this rush from the feet all the way up to my feet, to my head, just like a wave of sensations coming up like that. And then there was like, whew, everything kind of disappeared for a moment. And I felt this incredible joy of recognizing that there is so much more life than myself alone. You know, I think part of the reason why we suffer, at least the reason why I suffer, is that sometimes I fall into some kind of unconscious belief, conscious or unconscious, I'm not sure, that all life depends on me. Yeah. Right? Which at a certain extent, it's true, because if I die, well, there is no experiencing of life from this particular point of view, right? But step into a forest and you recognize there's so many systemic elements interacting together and birthing, you know, moment by moment, so much life in such a sustainable way. And suddenly life becomes something that envelops the being. And I think that's what was happening. And so I can very much relate to what you're saying. Is what I'm saying also something that echoes with you, Rose?
Absolutely. That's I just feel that I don't need, it doesn't need to be anything spectacular. It can be a walk by the water. It can be, as you say, the changing color of the leaves in the park. It can be a snail. It doesn't, you know, these are all things that I can't make. They're there, and that's incredible. The fact that they're there and full of life.
These are things that I cannot make. That's the central sentence, I think, here. To recognize that there are things in the world, and perhaps so many things that we cannot produce. And that opens for us a door to understand that perhaps we did not produce the initial terror, the initial anxiety, the initial reactivity, the initial procrastination, the initial depression, that there is something that allowed us to feel that way without us having created it. And so we can let go to that responsibility for a moment. And I think that's very salutary, very healthy. Mm.
And I can imagine, Nicholas, from that experience that you felt safe. You know, one thing Rose has been able to share when she got to the meetings, and I can just imagine the fact that she said that these meetings were in person and she felt safe enough to snooze. Yes. In the middle of strangers. These are strangers, and you feel safe enough to close your eyes and doze off for the first time in your life in 45 years. I can imagine that was almost similar to how you were feeling from the busyness and the weight from the last week, and you get into a place whereby you don't control the trees, you don't control the creek, and it's in the open place, but you felt safe in that moment. You felt safe in that environment.
Absolutely. And I did lie down on the ground.
Wow.
And just dozed off precisely. And just out of that release of needing to be in control. That is also another key way of expressing it, I think. And let's acknowledge the things that we don't control. I have clients that come to work with me, and they will fight with me to prove to me that they have to be in control. Because if they're not in control, something really, really, really bad will happen.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I sense from the very beginning that that's exactly why things are not going well, and sometimes are not going well at a high level, like you described before, Rose. So all I wish for them in one way or another is to realize that they can just be, that they can just be there. They don't have to enter into any kind of action or reaction. And that's just completely outside the possibility that they can bring to the table, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, because they can't switch off the vigilance button, Nicholas. They can't switch it off. Hanging on to the control is what's keeping them alive. So it's like, you know, I think we all have to, for me, I had to get to a point where my fear dropped. And I was told that as I came into the rooms, I was told, little by little, your fear will subside. Now, that was a good thing to say to me, because I felt no shame because I couldn't turn it off. Because, of course, that's what I always felt when I went in to talk to people. You know, I wasn't unintelligent. I could not understand why I couldn't stop the terror and the panic. I thought I should be able to, and so there's an incredible amount of shame. What I was told in the rooms is, this will drop away. As you start working the steps, this will drop away. And I heard people say, I used to be too afraid to do that. Now I can do it. I started out with little steps. People encouraged me. Going back to what you said, you know, if you've got a phone list of 30, 20 people that you can phone and say, look, I'm about to do this. I'm frightened. Let's pause for a minute, bring in, you know, both our higher powers. I'm going to do this and then I'll ring you afterwards. Sometimes I would imagine all the faces in the rooms. I would go in my mind, I would imagine them, because, you know, for me, like you said about letting go of the control, for me, if I let go of the control, all I could see was catastrophe up ahead. Well, catastrophe isn't, you know, that's a whole neural pathway that needs to be changed. And that's done little by little with practice. It's somebody can say something and it will begin it, hopefully, but then you've got to practice. And that needs people encouraging you. That needs people to say, hey, you know, you tried that, you did really well, keep at it. Or, you know, don't do that maybe, that's not such a good idea. I used to do that, it didn't work for me. So, you know, it takes adjusting. But that idea of the higher power, yeah, it's very potent. But you know what you've got to say to your clients now, don't you? When they say that you've got to test out saying you might be right. See what they do.
That's a beautiful, beautiful suggestion there. I love that, actually, and I felt when you said you might be right to your brother, I felt there was like a mirror image of the recognition of this higher power, because in that moment also you kind of step out of your ego. You know, you let go to the judging being that what a person can be, that you could be in that situation of saying you are right or you're wrong. You stepped out of that role.
Absolutely. Well, and that's one of the things, that's one of the slogans, you know, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You see, because of the sort of the fear, the growing up in the control, you know, I would be so defensive, and very often I needed to be right. So I would continue arguing, not to my good. This would spoil my day. Whereas people in the room said, well, you know, don't get in the boxing ring. Don't get in there. Now, I didn't know that was a possibility. I had no idea that I could change what I was doing. But
you know, if we think back to the child is powerless to begin with. Like, let's say the child is 1 year old and the parents are fighting because they're both maybe drug addicts, alcoholics, or maybe just one of them is, highly dependent on a substance and violent, and the other one is just trying to keep things together. So the 1 year old child, what can he do? He can only cry, right? In a way, he's completely powerless. And the parental figures are like gods. So the higher power that we're talking about, it has a very sort of negative impact on the child. Maybe that's where the fear also of recognizing a higher power comes in. Of course, the higher power that we're talking about later on is a higher power that we choose, contrary to the situation with the child. But the child perhaps grows into a situation where he feels powerless, and then it's only towards the age of 4, 5, 6 that when the child begins to form an idea of self, when the ego begins to be born, that perhaps then the child begins to engage with new tactics of, doing this or doing that. I think already earlier on, before the age of 4, there are unconscious attempts for the child to regulate the system as a whole. But the child has gone through quite a set of activities and strategies to be able to keep things peaceful, let's say.
Absolutely.
And all of them have failed because the parents have so much more power.
Yeah, and I mean that's where the idea of the child that ends up with a full-time employment of being the peacemaker.
Yes.
Child that's always in the middle, who's trying to keep the boat afloat. Now,
Yeah.
just to say that, of course, in Al-Anon, we're dealing with the wreckage of this, and for a lot of people, when they go in and they look at their the steps, you come up against this when you're looking at resentments, because people, of course, anytime you're blaming somebody, then you're stuck in that situation. That keeps you glued in that situation. Anytime you're blaming any other person for what you're now living or how you're now feeling, it keeps you glued in a very fearful and sort of downtrodden, possibly victim kind of outlook.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what happened, when I was going through the steps, and I got pretty angry with the person who I was sharing this with, and I said, they said, what's your part in, the violence that went on in your childhood? And I'm like, what do you mean my part in it? I was small. What could I have possibly done about it? But it was important for me to say that, because the person then said to me, exactly, as a child, you were powerless. You're now an adult. And the important thing is, today, you can take responsibility for your own well-being. Now, that sounds very simple, but for me, it was useful. It was turning my thoughts, my mind away from blaming the people that were in my life, who should have been looking after the child. And it was turning towards an adult that was there, an adult that had resources. And I was given full responsibility, honestly, 100% in truthfulness, that for me to walk forward in my life and to improve it in any way, I had to take full responsibility for my own happiness in that particular day. I can't live a good life today if I'm stuck in the past. I cannot live a good life today if I'm catastrophizing about tomorrow. It's said that we suffer, the thing we suffer as human beings most from are the two things that are amazing tools. One is memory, and the other is imagination. I could only, I'd gotten to the point where, catastrophizing was, that's what phobias, I had a whole bunch of phobias. I was fearful about going outside. There was a whole range of things. Now, those things weren't happening to me. I was afraid to go out the door because I had a whole bunch of things in my imagination that could happen to me, potentially. I had to turn away from that. You see, it's again, we're going back to that idea of pulling focus, pausing, and changing my attitude. And this takes time, for anybody coming in. My life started to improve as soon as I walked in those rooms, because I could see other people felt really awful. They did certain things. Now they feel better. So maybe if I do what they're doing, then my life will improve. And that was all I needed to know, really. I needed to move out of old ideas. I needed to change my attitudes. And what you're fighting against, as you said, from the child's, we're fighting with our childhood set of survival skills. We're not fighting as adults. And you mentioned the ego as well. And in every step that we take, in all the 12 steps, we're told that a little bit of the ego gets lessened with each step, which I think is really interesting. It's something I'm still going into and learning about, because there's always something to explore.
And I'm curious, Rose, when it comes to mainly just detaching, when you said how you had to detach, you're taught how to detach from the person that you love, but really still love them. Would you say that it is completely connected to the slogan of live and let live?
Absolutely.
When it comes to your memory and your imagination, you had to just be in the present, not be in the past, to live in the present, and let live and let others go, and let others say, you might be right. Let me allow you to live in your truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful slogan. It's really, really wonderful slogan, because just that simple word, to leave people alone, not there. I'm completely powerless over how much somebody drinks or whether they want to drink. And the rooms are not for people that need it. They're for people that want it. The person has to want to come into the rooms. The person has to want to change, because there's nothing I can say to anybody if the other person is not interested in, or if they're not at a time in their lives where they're looking to change, then nothing I say will make any difference. But if you want your life to be different, then you'll hear things that are useful. And that's perfect. Leave the person alone. Leave the person who's drinking alone and concentrate on, what you're putting into your life. Keep the focus on yourself. What are you doing for you? So that might be something really simple. For example, if you're living with somebody who's unreliable, somebody who's, who says they'll be there and they're not there. Now, you can make a plan B. Now that sounds really simple, but I would phone a fellow and I would say, look, I plan to do this. We've got tickets for this. But if they don't turn up, are you okay to be my plan B? Do you want to come with me if this person doesn't turn up? This means I have no expectations on the person, none whatsoever, and that I'm ready to go and enjoy my life with my plan B person who's going to be standby. And I've been standby for other people. I've been plan B for other people if they think that their loved one's not going to turn up for any reason or just be unreliable. But it's an incredibly powerful to turn your attention away from what the other person is doing. Not to complain about them, just turn around and look at your own life. Because of course, many of the reasons, we're hiding. I know that I was hiding behind, I was completely occupied by what the other person was doing. And that meant that I wasn't taking responsibility for my own life. I wasn't looking and saying, hey, you know, maybe I don't like what I'm doing and I could do something else, which is what actually happened when I went into the rooms. I always wanted to change my profession, and that's exactly what I did. I found the strength, the courage, the encouragement in the rooms, and I completely stopped putting energy into the other person or expecting things from the other person, and I looked to what can I do for myself today.
But does that mean in certain cases that, for example, as the mother of a child, you have to accept in a way that this, you know, that you don't have a husband anymore, and that you don't have a father for a child anymore? For in a certain sense, do you have to detach to that extent to understand that, well, no, this man is not able to be present, not able to come back home at an appropriate time to look after the child, to connect with the child? When we talk about detachment, what in practice,
it means just leaving the other person alone and not expecting things from them. No, it doesn't mean you have to leave the person. And in fact, you know, that's an entirely personal decision. But
no, but internally, it does mean that you have to accept that even though you might be married or associated with this person, but that emotionally nothing really is connecting inside there.
Well, let's put it this way. If what you're doing is hanging around and complaining about the behavior of somebody else, and you cannot change the behavior of that somebody else, the only behavior you can change is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And that means making alternative plans for you,
Mm-hmm.
and possibly you and your child. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean excluding the other person, doesn't mean being unkind to them. It just means moving ahead in your own life and taking responsibility for your own happiness. And you know, no, it doesn't mean detaching, moving away from the person. It just means not having expectations from them.
So, for example, I have this situation in mind where I used to, when I lived in certain regions of the world, after 10 o'clock, I would just lock the door twice and keep the key in the lock, just in case somebody wanted to try to come in. If my husband or wife doesn't come back before 10, that's what I should be doing to safeguard myself and my child.
That might be the right solution for some people. It might be. Or it might be leaving the door open. Or it might be put as a sleeping bag outside so that they're not cold. I mean, it's up to the individual to find a solution that works for them. There's no prescribed kind of advice. And that's super important. But
that could entail some kind of harsh...
It can be a boundary, yes. I mean, it can be a boundary. There are people, for example, that I know who they've separated and they have the rule, you know, please don't come to the house if you've been drinking. You can't take the children in the car if you've been drinking. You know, that to me seems sensible, because as parents, we definitely, you know, we have to safeguard our children. I mean, I'm not suggesting in any way that there's, you know, that has to be the case. Yeah, children have to be looked after. Absolutely.
And I don't know if you're seeing this also, Nicholas, is that one of the slogans, I think even Rose, you touched on it, is you've mentioned it a couple of times, is keeping it simple. And what I'm realizing, even as Nicholas, you're sharing on these different scenarios, I'm realizing that Rose is one of the pivotal philosophies in Al-Anon, is to keep it as simple and as practical as possible in this recovery process. Would you say that's a very foundational truth, that every process in these 12 steps is very simple for easy application to take in and practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time choose the simplest solution. every single time.
Right. So in the case of the door, for example, you can envisage maybe 5 solutions, and then out of those 5 solutions, just pick the simplest one.
But me personally, what I would do in that situation, if somebody came to me and repeated that, I would say to them, okay, let's look at possible scenarios, and keeping in mind that you need to be safe, and your limits of what you can cope with. But then I would ask them to make up I would ask them for their scenarios. I wouldn't suggest anything unless I was unless I'd been in exactly that position. If I'd been in that position, I would say, this is what I tried. But if I haven't actually lived that, I would not make any suggestions. I would just put it to the person. Let's look at suggestions, you and I together. Let's look at possible things you could do. Tell me what you think you could do. Because it's never for me to give a solution to somebody else's situation. I can
that apply the principle of keep it simple, or choose the simpler.
Always choose the simplest, yeah. As a rule of thumb, always choose the simplest. And that works in all areas of life, I've found. Keep it as
maybe I could ask that, possibly for those who might be watching and interested in the Al-Anon group, are there practical situations whereby there are some people who have joined Al-Anon group and do not agree with all the 12 steps? Is it possible to just take what you like and what applies to someone and leave the rest? Is it the possibility to just take what they feel will apply to them and not apply some of the rest? Would that be accommodated in the group?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's another saying. It's another slogan. Take what you like and leave the rest. Absolutely. Yeah. So if I don't like the bit about God, I can just leave it out. If I don't like the bit about detaching with love, I can leave that out. The thing is that it's everything in the rooms are suggested. Even the 12 steps, they're suggested 12 steps. For me, it was important to work them, all of them. So, if we work with a sponsor, and a sponsor is somebody who's been in the rooms maybe a little bit longer and they've worked the steps, and then they're going to show you how to go through the process of working the steps. So when I have a sponsee, I suggest that they work all the steps in the order.
And is one of the steps detaching with love?
No, it's not a step, it's a slogan. It's just something that's said in the rooms there, detach with love. But detachment is very, it's super important.
Is there an example that you could guide us through, either of a case that you've come across recently or something that happened in your own life, where you could sort of guide us through almost step by step of how a detaching with love process happens? What are we looking for?
Okay, something from my own experience, although I wasn't in the rooms at the time. But I had somebody that I loved very much who was severely depressed and who wouldn't get out of bed, kept the curtains drawn constantly, and they had people that would bring them up food. And I said to the person, I love you very much, but I'm not bringing you up food. If you're hungry, you need to go down, you need to sort that out. I'm not taking responsibility for bringing up the food, which I found unbelievable. This was unbelievably difficult for me. But
what are you feeling at that moment when you're saying that?
Sorry?
What are you feeling in that moment when you're saying that?
Oh, I felt that I was being completely disloyal to the person, and that I was being unkind, that I was letting them down, that I wasn't being a good friend. I was ashamed. I felt that the person might see it as me bullying them. I went on to catastrophic thinking, and I thought maybe they'll commit suicide because I'm being so unpleasant.
Wow.
Yeah, but for me, it was letting that person live their own lives and take responsibility for their own actions. I wasn't enabling them. And we talk a lot about that in the rooms, not to enable the person. So giving money to somebody when you know they're going to go out and spend it on alcohol or drugs. It's very hard to say to somebody, I'm not giving you any more money. And they maybe will say, it's for food, or it's, to go to the dentist, or I don't know what. And they're not necessarily telling the truth. But for me, not to join in and enable that person to then go off and do something that's harmful to them. So sometimes it can be quite clear, and sometimes it's, it takes a little bit of discussing with another person to sort of work out what works best for the individual. But
would you say that at a certain level, it's also deciding to behave according to a set of principles rather than out of an emotional sort of reaction to the situation, in the sense that here I imagine you walking into this dark room where this friend or person that you know is, they're not getting fed. They might be expecting you to bring some food, but you don't bring some food. And the emotions that overcrowd the room in that moment is probably some form of sadness or anger or fear, as you said, right? Of potentially them starving themselves to death or killing themselves, and sadness because they're not getting up and getting the joy of eating, and so on, right? But in that moment, you're not acting out of those emotions. You're acting of what you have calmly, somewhere safely understood as being the behavior that will allow them to take responsibility, as you said before. And therefore, that is, I am not going to participate anymore in bringing you food.
It's not participating in any kind of anything that will then the person can go on and self-harm. As much as possible, it's standing back. And you see, this is where it's so hard to do when you're on your own. But if you've got somebody you can talk to about it, if you've got a higher power that you can ask to look, I ask that people be looked after. I do, me personally, I do pray. I ask that, this person be helped. Always. And me too, to do the right thing. Because I don't know. I don't know what's the best thing for another person. It's hard enough trying to understand what's best for me. So I don't know what's best for that person. But if I can see that what I'm doing is enabling the person to continue in something that's harmful to them, then I can withdraw from that.
Mm-hmm. And that's detaching with love.
It's detaching with love. No, I won't go down to the off license and buy you a beer, but I will make you a tea and bring you some soup if you want. I mean, it's not joining in. It's leaving the person to their own responsibility. Letting them have the dignity of their own choice. So I'm never going to persuade somebody not to drink. I'm never going to try and persuade somebody, not to take drugs. It's not my business. Now I've talked to you.
That thing about the dignity, that was such a powerful sentence. It just went a bit too quickly. I'm going to let themselves have the dignity. Something. Please say that again.
The dignity of choice.
I'm going to let them have the dignity of choice.
So if I'm jumping in all the time, it means that they might not get to where they need to be. Maybe they need to be desperate.
And maybe somewhere they were robbed of that dignity also.
I think family and friends enabling can, does a lot of harm. You know, if you're covering up for somebody's, you know, not being able to go to work, if you're covering up by giving somebody money, if you're covering up by phoning and lying about where somebody was, that's all helping the person to stay in their own lifestyle. And while you're doing that, of course, you're not living your own, as Renee said, you know, live and let live. It's like, what do I need to do for myself today? Instead of me fretting about what this person is doing, what do I need to do for myself today? And it might be something really simple, like, have I eaten today? You know, I'm fussing about somebody else, but have I eaten today? Have I had enough sleep? Have I had enough fluid, enough exercise? Am I lonely? Do I need to sort of reach out and talk to some friends? Am I angry about something? Maybe I need to write some stuff down and then share it with another fellow. Now, I need to keep bringing the focus back to myself, because the thing is that you know, I think it's never a good idea, as I said, to look at, you know, the good one and the bad one. It's not a question of good one and bad one. It's a family illness. And, you know, some people anesthetize their fear of life by drinking, and other people anesthetize their fear of life by being controlling and mothering, manipulating. But all of it is removing yourself from the kind of the very realness, that, you know, that stream, the feeling by the stream, and the feeling outside, you know, the wonders of life. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the fellowship is about the joy of life. You know, it's getting back to the joy of life. And when I first came in, somebody said to me, I want you to write down 100 things that you either like or like to do. I can't tell you how hard that was. I no longer had any idea of what I liked. I was so far removed from myself. I had absolutely no idea. And that for me, you know, that for me is depression. It's, you know, the anxiety has been so high for so long that my own body has turned down how I can react to the world. It was like I was looking at the world through a window. I could see my life was happening out there somewhere, but I didn't have access to it. And those little things, writing that list was incredible. And I still have this thing, so I shall tell you about it. I wrote down, at that time, I wasn't doing anything artistic, but I loved color, absolutely loved color. And I wrote down that I liked bright colors. And I went off and I bought myself a quilt cover that was bright reds and bright oranges. And it was interesting because it was a very small thing, but it made a difference. I put that on the bed, and it was one of the first things that I felt I'd changed in my life. I saw those bright colors and they uplifted my spirits every time I saw them. I also like colored pencils. I went and got myself a box of colored pencils, and I put them on the table. It's like, it can be very, very small. And I love that image. Somewhere in the literature, we talk about, you know, light, the very, very smallest actions. It's like lighting a candle in a dark room. If it's a pitch black room, you only need the tiniest amount of light, and then you can maneuver around the room. You can avoid bumping into furniture. You don't need to have a whole solution to your life. It's like tiny, tiny amounts of light will improve it no end right from the get-go. You know, I felt better as soon as I walked into these rooms, coming from a place of feeling doomed, that there was nothing I could do, that I was completely powerless. And I went to the idea that it was possible that things could be different.
Beautiful, beautiful. Rose, I think we have to come to an end for this live. It's been extremely insightful. I can't thank you enough for your contribution. This topic takes me really to the edge of my understanding of what is good therapy and what is a good therapist, and I can see my mind and heart struggling for real understanding of what you're saying. So you're really expanding my boundaries, I think, when you speak in the way that you do. So I can't thank you enough, and hope to see the transformation coming soon enough in my own being. So thank you very much from the depth of my sincerity.
Thank you, Nicholas. That's you know, I think you're open-minded and you're kind, and it's like, you know, that's a very good, they're very good elements for a therapist. You know what I mean? It's quite incredible. It's been my pleasure to share this, to share my experience, strength, and hope.
Thank you.
And maybe allow me to share my own insight with it, is that I feel that for anyone, you know, Nicholas, the first slide where we got to introduce Al-Anon, and having this discussion, it really brings dignity and brings the honor that we got to share in the first time. I can remember for our viewers who we got to go through the website, we got to see the different templates, the structures, but getting to hear about the experience, getting to hear what you will experience meeting these individuals, of course, anonymous, and getting to fellowship. The experience of this fellowship is something that can't really be expressed in any other way, whether digitally or anywhere else. So I really would like to encourage anyone who feels these resources will benefit them, this community will benefit them. They should really join and getting to hear from what Rosa said, how she was accommodated, as she was as confused as she was, as even understanding that the degree and the intensity of her troubles. For some who actually might be watching and feel that I might be too far gone, but Rose says, so did she feel she was too far gone. And getting a friend who just recognized something in her and invited her to this space, even though she had a lot of reservations, you know, of course, because of the religious connotations that you may have. And it's okay. And I'm so glad to hear that any reservations, any person who wants to come in and has these reservations, has these experiences, they're all accommodated. And thank you, Rose, for sharing this community with us. And thank you for being part of this community. For the last 25 years, it is such a blessing for you to pour out just a bit of that experience that you may have. You may have even much more if we had more time. So
True.
Thank you again.
Rennie, thank you. And thank you for helping to put the message out there, because, you know, that's, yeah, I can't keep it if I don't give it away. It's important to share. Important to share, and I really appreciate all the technology that allows this to be possible. The message is heard too. Yeah, it is a message for me. It was a message of hope.
Wonderful, wonderful. Maybe next time we'll have you walking us through the 12 steps and maybe commenting on each step, so that we can get some deeper insights into how actually the program works. That would be another exciting live. Rose, thank you very much. I greet you a good evening and a good night. Renee, to you too, thank you for being here. Thank you for all our viewers, and we'll see you again very soon in All About Trauma live on the different channels in which we post these lives. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.